Good evening and welcome to the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantongwa Kumalo. It's episode 277 of the Private Property Podcast. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to it. Where have you been? We're slowly counting down to our 300th episode. And so because you're joining us for the first time, do make sure that you go to our Facebook or our YouTube page to catch up on all the exciting episodes that you have already missed out on. And of course, to our regular viewers, welcome back. You know how we do it every single weekday at 7 p.m. You and I have an appointment where I'm always in conversation with property experts who help us navigate our property journey. This is the only daily property talk show in South Africa that helps you on your property journey. Whether you're looking to buy, to sell, whether you're renting or a landlord, this is the show that helps you along the way. And speaking of shows that help you along the way, of course, there are all other shows that you can look forward to across Private Property's social media pages. I am talking about the first-time home buyers show that Essie Claassen brings to your screens every Wednesdays. She's always in conversations with people who've already walked that first-time home buying journey and have gone on to grow their property portfolio from strength to strength. And every Monday and Friday, Chad takes us through exclusive properties all across the country that you can also find on www.privateproperty.co.za. So if you want to get a sneak peek into some gorgeous apartments from luxury mansions to, of course, those that many of us at home can certainly afford, do make sure that you do not miss that show. And award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko brings you the Farming Podcast every Tuesdays and Wednesdays. If you have green fingers or certainly want to explore the business of farming, you certainly do want to make sure that you tune into that show. I shared with many of you at home that I'm also picking up, we'll call it gardening because it's not farming just yet. So I'm starting my own little veggie garden here at home. And I'm certainly looking forward to documenting the journey and obviously also applying some of the tips that I've heard on Bali's show with the different experts that she has on. Well, talking about, helping you on your property journey, one of the big things that we've certainly emphasized here on the show and one that is, I'll say, trending, not just on social media, but certainly across the news, is, of course, around the Popi Act. And this evening, we're going to be looking at the deadline for the Popi Act and being compliant. And I'm sure for those of you at home, you might be thinking, what is the Popi Act? How is it even applicable to me, particularly if you're a homeowner or a property investor? Those are some of the issues that we are going to be exploring. Also, if you live in a sectional title community or an estate, you also want to make sure that you tuned in because this certainly does apply to you and want to get a sense of how it applies to you. And in the event where the different people who handle your data when it comes to your property needs aren't compliant, what can you do and what are some of the repercussions for non-compliance? And to help us better understand the Popi Act, as we know, it will be coming in full effect on the 1st of July. I'm joined this evening by Zerlinda van Merwe, who's a co-founder of TVDM Consultants, as well as Leigh-Anne Harrison, who's a portfolio manager at RPA Property Administrators. Ladies, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi there, good evening. Thank you for having us. Gee, it's almost 300. It's so exciting.
I know, right, Zerlinda? When I think back, thank you so much, Leigh-Anne. When I think back to the first time we had you on, Zerlinda, it was last year. It was probably before we even reached episode 50. And so to have you now at 277 is certainly a pleasure. But let's get into it. I think one of the big things with, this evening's conversation, I certainly want to hear from you at home. First, I want to hear from you at home. Do you know about the Popi Act? I mean, it's coming into effect on the 1st of July. So do you know about the Act? If you do, what have you heard about it? I know that it's making a lot of news on social media and across, various news platforms. So let me know what you know about it and how do you think it's applicable to you? Because I think this is also one of those things we mustn't take for granted that in as much as we can know that there's an act that's about to come into effect, perhaps we don't always have the greatest understanding of how it might be applicable to us. And Leigh-Anne, I want to hear firstly from you about what the Act, ultimately is, because a lot of people have been speaking about it. We've spoken about it on the show, and I think drawing closer to the we'll say the June 30th deadline as we get ready for July 1. We certainly want to get a good understanding of what it is and how to best understand, of course, how it affects us.
Thank you, Zama. And again, thank you for having me this evening. I always look forward to these chats with you. So, essentially, pre-Popi, the Constitution says that everybody has a right to privacy. And what Popi has done ultimately is it has been enacted to promote and advance that right to privacy. Privacy of our information, how it's been shared, who has access to it, etc. And what the Act states is that if you as a person, whether it's an individual or a company, juristic person, processes personal information, then Popi applies to you. Now, that sentence alone, I could unpack and we could sit here for hours. But essentially, processing personal information means using information collected from somebody for a specific purpose. And in the context of community schemes, we collect information to communicate with owners, to send out levy statements, etc. And that is processing their information. We're using it for a purpose. And in that way, the Act applies to us. A lot of the time, people are asking us, but does it really apply to me? I mean, I'm just a small business owner or a smaller scheme, or I'm just me. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you use information for a specific purpose? And if you do, then the Act is applicable to you. If you're processing personal information for whatever reason, the Act, you have to comply with it. That's the short and sweet answer.
And Leigh-Anne, I actually want us to explore then how it affects, because we're obviously going to be focusing primarily on property. It can certainly obviously affects pretty much every industry because some kind of personal data is always captured. When we look at the effects that the Act has, let's look at first just property transactions, because I think this is where perhaps a lot of people may not think that the Act is applicable to them, as you were saying, that oftentimes you think, well, maybe this is not applicable to me. I mean, I'm even thinking if you're going to potentially be renting an apartment and, an estate agent takes your data, they often make you fill out a form with a lot of personal information around your income. Sometimes they'll even want a copy of your ID to first just, do a background check. So it isn't only for people who own a property or are about to, buy a property, but also, of course, people who are renting. Perhaps take us through the effects then on property transactions almost holistically. So from your renter right up to, your homeowner.
Look, if I break it down, so, renting, if I'm a lessee and I've got a landlord, I've given him information of mine so that he can use it for the lease purposes. So he's using my information for a purpose, and in that way, he's processing my information, and then the Act is applicable to him. Me as the lessee, I need to know, what is he doing with the information? How is he keeping it safe and secure? Where is he storing it? For how long will he keep it for? As a data subject, I'm entitled to that information. As the landlord or lessor, I've got to make sure that whatever information I keep safe. There shouldn't be any unauthorized access or destruction or sharing it with other people that I'm not allowed to do so. Because the reason why the lessee shared the information with me was for a purpose, being the lease. Now we find that in many transactions, I would share information with you, and then you'd be approached by somebody else to purchase the information for direct marketing purposes. And that is what the Act is not permitting. In the age of, a lot of the times, estate agents, they want information of ours or of our clients so they can direct market, cold call. And the Act, that's one of the things the Act is wanting to stop, because I never consented to that. I consented for you to use my information for the lease purpose only. Same with the homeowner. When I want him to buy a property, I hand my information over to the attorneys, who then process this transaction. They submit information to the deeds office by the conveyancer, and the whole process sort of commences and concludes. That attorney, I've got to be satisfied that whatever information I give to him, he holds secure. He does so in terms of the purpose that I gave it to him for, and that he never provides for unauthorized access or the sharing of it with other people without my consent. You know, the aspects of Popi is consent, purpose, and security. So whenever I'm sharing information, the purpose I shared it for must always remain the same. There must be consent. If, you know, I've given information for a purpose, I'm consenting to them using it for that purpose. And then it's the security. I've got to know myself that the security of the information, there's integrity in the security of the information. If I'm not satisfied, I can tell the attorney or my landlord, listen, how are you keeping my information secure? Where is it being held? Are you holding it on your computer? What firewalls do you have in place, or what are the IT requirements, or have you met? Those are the core aspects for any transaction to take place. You know, consent, there must be a purpose, stick to the purpose, and there must be security of the information.
If you've just joined us, I'm in conversation this evening with Leigh-Anne Harrison and Zerlinda van der Merwe as we explore the Popi Act. I know many of us are probably aware that on the 1st of July, the Act is going to come into full effect. But of course, the Paia provisions have been, already in place for the past 5 years. If anything, many people thought maybe we'll get another extension this time around, but it doesn't seem like it. We're already halfway into June. And I think if anything, we all have to be ready to, certainly as companies have to be ready for the 1 July, we'll call it deadline or kickoff. And Zerlinda, this is where I want to bring you in, because as Leigh-Anne has, highlighted that really at the core of the Act, you want to make sure that consent, purpose, and security are essentially observed and guaranteed to people whose data you're going to have. How is this then applicable to people who live in sectional title communities, whether it's estates or, of course, just your normal sectional title communities? Because as I can imagine, and I'm an owner and an investor in sectional title schemes, there's quite a lot of our data that is available from the managing agent to the trustees. So how can we make sure that or be rest assured as consumers that our data is going to be properly handled? And what's the responsibility do the managing agents and the trustees have when it comes to ensuring that our data isn't compromised in any way?
Fantastic. So, it's a question we get very often with sectional title schemes and homeowners associations that, they're not a company, why should they have to comply? And surely if they're a small body corporate, maybe only 3 or 4 units, the Act doesn't apply to them. But unfortunately, it does. It applies to every single sectional title scheme, every retired person scheme, every homeowners association. They all have to comply, as well as the offices of their managing agents if they have one. Now, the focus really is to make sure, like Leigh-Anne said, that they've consented to their information being used and that their information is being used for a specific purpose. So to add on to what Leigh-Anne was speaking about with, for example, rental agents and sales agents, you often find that some managing agents also have or offer the services of rentals and sales. And the question can be asked to whether or not they're entitled to use that database of information they have of the owners of the units in the schemes that they manage for the purpose of rentals and sales. And if that is the focus of their business, and if those owners have consented to that information being used for those purposes, then of course it's entitled to be. But if you only have a division relating to property management, and that is all that you're using the information for is the property management aspect, you obviously can't use it for the sales and rentals. So it's a very thin line as to what your business does versus what services you're offering to a specific client, and of course the owners of those units or those urban. In a sectional title situation, we often get the question as to, can owners now no longer access the information of the body corporate? In other words, contact details of owners, email addresses, telephone numbers, cell phone numbers. perhaps debtors information, who is in arrears, how much are they in arrears because of Popi? And the answer is that information is still made available because the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act provides, in terms of prescribed management rules, that any record of the body corporate, as is listed, must be made available for inspection and copies. Of course, the trustees or the managing agents need to make sure that the person that is asking for it is either an owner or a person authorized in writing by an owner, and the information that they're asking for is something that does fall out of the body corporate records, and the purpose that they're asking for relates to the administration and management of the body corporates. And of course, that they indemnify the trustees and the managing agent should that person use it for a different purpose. So if I was an owner, I could go to the managing agent and say, as an owner, I want access to everybody's email addresses. The managing agent must provide me with that within 10 days of my request. They can say, please come to our offices, have a look at it, make a copy. I'm going to charge you 15 Rand a page, for example. They can most certainly do that. They're going to ask me, why are you wanting the information? I'm going to say, for example, I'm sick and tired of the way that this body corporate is run. I want to get rid of the trustees and get rid of you as managing agent, and I'm going to put my own committee in place. I'm entitled to that. But what happens if I then don't do that and I rather email everybody to say, hey, if you would like to sell your unit, please use my company. Or, if you would like to use my services as an attorney, please contact me. That's obviously not using it for the purpose that, number one, I've told the managing agent of body corporate I'll use it for. Number two, that the body corporate and managing agent is protecting that information for. So it's very important that the trustees and managing agent make sure, who they're giving the information to, what are they giving it, what information they're giving, and why are they giving that information, and indemnify themselves. From an HAA perspective, again, it comes down to what the governance document says. What does the Constitution say? What does the Memorandum of Incorporation say? And in most homeowners associations, there's a lot less access to records than in a body corporate. But at the same time, if the governance documents allows that access cannot be denied. So it's all about how we're giving the information, why we're giving the information, but we certainly can't prohibit that information from being made available or extend the timelines in terms of the legislation or the governance document as well. The other big question that we're getting at the moment is, who is the information officer? And the information...
And Zerlinda, I actually want to come in there because on the question of the information officer is actually one of the points that one of our listeners has pointed out. Of course, to our viewers at home, if you have any questions or comments, do send them down here below. We are coming to you across our social media platforms on Facebook, on YouTube. You can send them through as well as on Instagram. And one of the questions that's come through from Facebook comes from Lemise Finch, who asks, how does the appointment of an information officer affect an executive managing agent? First, Zerlinda, just take us through what the information officer is before you answer this question.
Okay, so the information officer is appointed by any company, any entity, any body corporate or homeowners association, basically to be the responsible person. This needs to be the head of the organization. So in a body corporate, it would be the chairperson or one of the trustees. In a homeowners association, one of the trustees or the directors. And of course, in a homeowners association, it could be the estate manager. But it's not going to be the managing agent. The managing agent in their own compliance, the CEO or the managing director would be that information officer. But ultimately, it is the person that needs to ensure compliance, and it's the person that's going to get into trouble if they don't comply. So they're the ones that need to control how access to information is granted, what that information is utilized for, how it is stored, how it is destroyed, when it is destroyed, and all of the other aspects that Leigh-Anne mentioned. In a normal context, a normal managing agent, not an executive managing agent, we've been inundated actually with queries from trustees and chairpersons to say, in most instances when we have a managing agent, we don't have access to the body corporate's records or the owner's information. The managing agent has that access. So why should we be held accountable for what they do with it? But in a sectional title context and in a homeowners association context, the function of keeping that information and using that information can be delegated to the managing agent, but the responsibility still rests with the body corporates and the trustees or the homeowners association. The community scheme ombud service is actually in the process of engaging with the information regulator, Jolene Wasserman, to be specific, from the CSOS, is doing this to find out whether or not managing agents will be allowed to be information officers. As you mentioned, the time is running out, so we are waiting with bated breath if that's the case. That being said, if the information regulator says it's okay, it doesn't mean the managing agent has to be the information officer. The managing agent has the right to turn that position down. And if they are going to accept it, in my humble opinion, they should be charging for it, because there's a lot more administration behind what they're needing to do, and they're contracted to the body corporate or the HA. To answer Lamisa's question, with an executive managing agent, it's a bit of an interesting one, because essentially with the appointment of an executive managing agent in a sectional title scheme only, you don't necessarily have trustees, which then means that executive managing agent in essence is the head of the organization. I'd actually be very interested to see how the information regulator deals with that, but that's a very good question.
We're taking more of your questions and comments this evening as we look at the Popi Act, as we draw closer and closer to 1 July when it comes into full effect. We're taking your questions and comments, and there's a quick question from Facebook here coming from Nisha Singh, who asks, what happens with the calls we are inundated with during the day from call center agents? Are these companies not complying with the Act? I'm going to give that one to you, Leigh-Anne, because part of these calls happen to be, I'm a homeowner. I know that one of the things that I tend to get calls a lot from are agents who are looking, to get a listing. I've been asked a dozen times, certainly in the last month alone, whether I'm selling any of my properties or whether any of my properties I want to put them up for rental. So whether you are having estate agents calling you for that purpose or other calls that we've been receiving, and I feel as though in the past sort of 3 months, the call volumes have, significantly increased to what they were before. It's almost as though they're, doing the last stretch of being able to just call us. And obviously we still don't know how they accessed our data. So how do we deal with that one? Are they going to be, are they going to be complying with the Act? How do they go about complying with the Act?
Thanks, Summer. It's actually a very good question, because you are absolutely right. We've been inundated over the last, 3 or 4 months with calls, ADT, Telkom, Vodacom, and when I receive these calls, and the one call I received, and I said to the person, where did you get my information from? Because I never signed up to receive ADT contract request or whatever the case may be. And that is what the Act is trying to stop doing, because essentially what's happened is a subsidiary of, I'm using ADT as an example, and nothing wrong with ADT because they're an awesome armed response company, but any company, they have received the information via somebody else. It's been sold most likely, and they've kept it on their database up until this point. And whenever the time or the opportunity arises, they're going to give me a call and try and sell products to me. And the Act is going to stop that, because if I never consented, I may have consented to Vodacom having my information or Telkom because I use their services. I never consented for them to sell their information to a subsidiary or a secondary company. That's called, secondary processing. I only gave my consent for one purpose, for my Telkom or Vodacom account. The secondary processing, I had to give my consent for, and if I didn't, they can't use the information. And what the Act also says is, whenever you get a phone call or any request or anything and you're unsure, you can ask them, where did you get my information from? And they have to tell you. The Act says that data soak participation is very important. If I ask you, Zama, where did you get my phone number from? You have to tell me by law where you got it from. I'm entitled to know where who's it being held by, how did you get it? And I can tell you, take it off your database. And if you don't do that and I receive a call in a week's time, I'm going to report you. And the reporting aspect has dire consequences for these big corporations, or any corporation for that matter. Not, the Act doesn't distinguish between a bigger company and a small company.
And a smaller company.
The breach is always the same. There's no level of breach or degree. You breached the security of my information. I'm going to report you, and then you'll be liable for the contravention as per the Act.
And I think one of the conversations when it comes to the Act has been around small businesses and how they're going to handle ensuring that they're compliant. And obviously, the cost of ensuring that data is safe, especially when you have higher volumes of that data, is quite significant. Bigger companies can easily budget for that. But unfortunately, a lot of small businesses are still going to struggle with that. Leigh-Anne, on the issue of, giving consent, particularly when you are in a database, I'm curious to find out from you, because one of the things that we've also seen, certainly in the last month, is a number of companies sending emails saying that we currently have your contact details on our file. You subscribe to our newsletter at whatever point in time. And because the Act is going to be coming into effect on 1 July, we're asking you whether you still want to continue, getting information from us or continue getting this newsletter. Is there an obligation, firstly, on companies currently who have our data, even our data, for example, for marketing purposes? So you've subscribed to your gazillion newsletters. Is there an obligation for them to send that email to us to say, if you want to remain in our database for receiving XYZ, then click here or don't do anything. But if you want to opt out, then opt out. Is there an obligation for that? Because I've been seeing quite a lot of that in my inbox in the past month.
So the Act specifically stipulates that it's not an opt-out, it's not an opt-out process, it's an opt-in process. You have to opt in to receive communication going forward and for a specific purpose. You can't make it open-ended where you say, well, we'll be marketing all of our services from A to Z, please give consent. It has to be specific and consent must be given. And if you don't consent, because they can only approach me once asking for my consent. If I don't consent or if I don't respond, they can't ask me again. The Act specifically states that, and then they can't contact me any longer. Look, prior to the Act or pre-Popi, and I think for Zerlinda as well with TVDM, any information that they've sent out in the past, they've received consent for. So they're already halfway there. So it's, if a company is unsure as to whether they've got consent, it's good to do an audit and then ask for the consent. But if the owner, if a person doesn't respond, then unfortunately you lose the right to communicate further, because it's right. We want to avoid this future spam all the time, sending out unnecessary emails or newsletters when I never really wanted it in the first place. Because as the consumer, I have that choice. Popi gives me that choice. So it definitely, you'll find over the next couple of days, you're going to be inundated. And the minute, if you say no, they can't contact you again. And if you don't respond, they can't contact you either. It's important that when you start receiving them after 1 July, highlight this to them that, they're in contravention and you're going to report them.
We're taking more of your questions and comments this evening. We've got a question coming through on Facebook from Sandy Lauder asking, and Zerlinda, I'm going to give this one to you. She's asking, have they sorted out if one person can be an information officer for two complexes?
So the portal is still not able to take the same person for multiple positions as information officer, as far as my understanding goes. But a couple of our colleagues in the industry have said that they have emailed the information regulator with that information and they haven't been told that they can't do so. And in some cases, you are going to be the chairperson of multiple schemes, or you are going to be the managing director of multiple companies. And this is most certainly something that needs to be rectified before they allow managing agents to be the information officer, because one can imagine there will be information officer for a multitude of schemes. So they haven't sorted it out yet, no, but there is a way around it, and that is emailing the information regulator as opposed to dealing with the registration on their portal.
And taking more of your questions and comments at home, we've got a question from one of our top fan gang members, Umatha Shinange, on Facebook asking, so now managing agents are required to submit plans on how they will be complying with the Act. So Zerlinda, is there an obligation for them to essentially notify us as homeowners of how they're going to make sure that they comply?
So the managing agents don't need to do that. They, of course, as a company, have to have their own Popi compliance procedures. They have to register their own information officers. And from a Paia perspective, they have to have their own Paia manual and make sure that that is delivered to the South African Human Rights Commission. But they don't have to send out a policy document to their clients. But if their clients ask for it, they most certainly must have that in place. And from the managing agents that we work with at TVDM Consultants, the majority of them, if not all, have already been complying with Popi requirements without even knowing it, simply by ensuring that from a reputational point of view, that they protect owners' information. I think the biggest thing that is going to come is the destruction of data. So in other words, when they no longer manage a scheme, or when a person is no longer owner in a scheme that they manage, that is going to be a bit of a challenge. Managing agents, and I can speak about them freely because I was one not too long ago. We're a bit like a hoarder. We like to keep information because we never know when we're going to need it again. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that anymore because of Popi requirements.
Leigh-Anne, one of the things that I want us to look at then is, of course, the compliance factor. You were mentioning earlier how one of the big tenets of the Act is making sure that there's security in place and that our data is going to be secured. In the event where you are a homeowner, you are a tenant, perhaps, or property investor, and you find out that the person who has your data, whether it is your landlord, whether it is the managing company, is not compliant. They have perhaps shared your data with a third party. What is the recourse? What steps can you follow? Because there's almost a part of me. I remember when conversations about this Act had started a couple of years ago, or when we were having this conversation with a friend a couple of years ago, saying you can't wait for it to be in full effect, because what he can easily do is, once it comes into full effect, he'll go to a company and essentially access the security book that a lot of security guards make us sign, where we even write our car registration numbers and our ID numbers. It was like, once I have that, then I can prove that they're not compliant, because here I am, an ordinary citizen, and I've been able to access all these people's data. And so that was his get rich quick scheme. He was just like, I can't wait for this to be in effect. So at home, I've probably just given you an idea on how you can potentially get rich. But when it comes to then compliance, and what can we do in the event where, companies are not compliant and essentially compromise our data?
Yeah. So just on that security get rich, what your friend mentioned, and it was a question I answered on the weekend. And it's so true, because if we go to, if I think to myself, if I go to a wine farm or some other place where I've driven through and I've put my details in the logbook, I can see everyone else's details. And the question comes about reasonableness, because perhaps they don't have the funds to do a more virtual or biometric system, which then allows me that I can't see the information. But then it's up to the person who is managing that process or handling that process to ensure that no one has unnecessary access. If that means that they are the ones that are going to have to fill the document out themselves and you can just cite it to them, or 1 page per person, it's what they have to do because the Act says so. You've got to secure the information from any unauthorized access, because the people will do that. They will use your ID numbers, they will use your phone numbers and send it off or share it. It's a reality. And the Act is very specific about contravention and what you can do. And if I found out that my managing agent shared my information with an estate agent, I can file a report with the information regulator, which is like the watchdog for Popi compliance. They will then investigate, and ultimately that person could, the Act says, receive a fine of up to 10 million rand or 12 months imprisonment. Look, I don't foresee that happening, as yet. A colleague of mine that works in Johannesburg said to me that what he foresees is that, let's say I share with you an email with Zerlinda's name, ID number, email address, and physical address without authorization. It could mean a 3,000 rand fine per item, per piece of personal information. Okay. So I think it's only time will tell what kind of a fine or contravention or consequence will happen, even though the Act stipulates, it's a fine or it's imprisonment. I think once we get to a point where we can start doing some case studies, we can see what is actually going to happen when there's a contravention. And I say this, a lot of the times as well, that if you've got somebody who's contravening the Act on a regular basis, it's going to affect their relationship, their business relationships going forward. I'm not going to want to work with a managing agent who's contravened the Act 5 times in 2022, because my confidence in them, the way they secure the information is lost, or it's not there at all. So, there are ways, if your banking information gets lost, besides reporting it to the regulator, you've got a damages claim should you have suffered any loss. So your banking information goes missing, and the next thing there's a withdrawal of 1,000 Rand from your bank account. You've suffered a loss. You can file a damages claim via court to get that money back from the person who breached the Act, essentially. So there are many ways that you can. There is recourse for those if you feel that your data has been breached.
And as we wrap, I know that we've eaten time into the program. Zerlinda, final tips for viewers at home, particularly those who are living in sectional title schemes or HOAs, when it comes to ensuring that they're working with a managing agent that is compliant and that their data is actually going to be safe. What tips would you give to them? Because a lot of our viewers, stay in sectional title communities, and often when they are watching the show, they learn new things, they go back, they ask those questions. What should we be asking our managing agents to, best ensure or check that they are in fact going to be compliant?
So again, it's not only the managing agent that needs to be compliant, it's the actual homeowners association or body corporate. So the question would be, is my scheme compliant? What information am I allowed to access? If it's a body corporate, you look at the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. If it's a homeowners association, look at the Constitution or the Memorandum of Incorporation. So know your governance documentation, know the Act. And then from the managing agent's perspective, it's a question of, are you as a managing agent company compliant? And then, of course, you can ask the managing agent or the trustees or directors, if there is no managing agent, what is the process that they're actually now going to put in place from the 1st of July? Because it's all good and well to have the manuals and then continue with life. It is actually enforcing it and dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So it's an information-seeking opportunity that owners should be looking at. And then, of course, to make sure that they themselves are compliant if they are landlords or directors of companies and things like that. So there's quite a bit of homework to be done, but they don't have to panic, that's for sure.
I'm actually going to squeeze in, a comment and one last question. The comment is coming from Andrika Leigh-Anne, who herself, runs Area Group, a managing company. They also sell and buy. They sell properties and do rentals on properties. And she says that these complexes will have to digitize their visitors registration process, and the same should be done at restaurants or companies. For example, we get a lot of, we sign a lot of COVID registers. And this ties in quite nicely with a question from Carolyn Message on Facebook, who asks, do you have suggestions for small complexes with few owners? And I know that I think bigger complexes are going to manage slightly better, but obviously oftentimes with small complexes, as owners, we tend to decide we'll run certain things ourselves because there often just isn't sufficient space really or scope to get in a managing agent who typically has a base fee, and you find that that's quite high. So what can your small sectional title schemes do in order for them to ensure that they are in fact compliant?
So the COVID one was definitely something that I wanted to mention. The screening questionnaires that need to get filled in. I mean, I went to hospital today for some tests and, I had to sign and there were 20 signatures and ID numbers and telephone numbers and email addresses before me. So it's the small things like that need to be obviously compliant. For a small sectional title scheme, unfortunately, irrespective of the number of units you have or number of urban you have in a small HOA, you still have to comply, like you have to comply with the governance documentation or the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. But there you have the opportunity to have a lot more engagement with owners, to, in other words, find out What are the owners happy with keeping on record? What are the owners happy with having that information utilized for? So engagement with the owners is going to be a lot more simple. To deal with their nitty-gritty questions, I can refer them to our website, and they can go have a look at the recordings that we've done of previous webinars, articles, that type of thing, that will give a smaller sectional title scheme or HA without a managing agent some guidance, without having to pay any monies for it. And I think that's the biggest thing. I'm also finding that because of all of these legislative requirements, more and more non-managed schemes are going the route of getting a managing agent. So that's also something to perhaps consider.
And we're going to leave it there. I know that this is one of those conversations, and I've had this conversation with both of you separately, that we can go on for a very extended period of time, because data is very sensitive. I mean, you can do so much with data, especially within the property space, and making sure that our data is safe is something that's obviously so important. We'll see if we can actually have you on maybe later on in the month as we draw closer and closer, or perhaps even in the new month, to see whether or not, and even get a sense from our viewers at home, whether or not their sectional title schemes are in fact compliant, and they're going to ensure that they're managing the owner's data as safely and of course within the legislative framework. Leigh-Anne, Zerlinda, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Zama. Much appreciated. I loved being on the show this evening.
And that is Leigh-Anne Harrison, as well as Zerlinda van der Merwe, as we wrap up the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. Join us again, of course, tomorrow evening at 7 p.m, as we always do. But I do not leave you alone at 8 p.m. You can catch the Home Shoppers Show with Chad. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.